President Trump's team is rounding into form. He picked up several big cabinet wins this week. Look at them. Now we're awaiting the swearing-in ceremony set later today for Howard Lutnick and also for Kash Patel. At 2:30 p.m. Eastern is when we'll see Lutnick. He'll officially become Trump's Commerce Secretary, and President Trump will be swearing him in. A few hours later, Trump's FBI director pick, Kash Patel, will take the oath of office. He'll be doing that alongside Pam Bondi, who will be administering the oath. We will bring you both of those when they happen. Now, the total number of confirmed Trump appointees stands at 19, and thus far, not a single one has been rejected by the Senate. You know, let's start here, Dr. Sapphire, with Kash Patel being sworn in this afternoon. The first thing I would want to do, if I were him, is open the books. And I'd want to see all the documents pertaining to the radical Catholic memo, the pro-life prosecutions, Russiagate. We've been waiting years to see these.
I certainly think that that's something we're going to be looking forward to this year. I mean, he wrote a book himself talking about a lot of the problems within the FBI, and he's not afraid to name names and call people out. He is not held to that political standard where he's afraid of falling out of favor with some people. But one thing that strikes me very odd here right now, do we realize that he is the first Asian and Indian American to lead the FBI? Under the Biden administration, how many times did we have to hear about this is the first so-and-so to do this? Kamala Harris, she was the first so-and-so to be vice president, run for president. Karine Jean-Pierre, LGBTQ community. But yet no one is talking about the same thing when it comes to Kash Patel, the fact that his parents were immigrants from Uganda and that he made his way to law school. And the fact that he was actually hired by the Department of Justice as a trial attorney under the Obama administration. The only reason people are criticizing him is because they don't like him and they know that he is going to align with Trump and make sure that to get all of the bureaucracy and all of the bad players out of the FBI. He said it himself. He wants to let good cops be good cops, and he wants to get people back in the field focusing on violent crime. And that's what he's going to do.
He has another big task, and it was one that was applauded when Elon Musk mentioned it yesterday. We know those assassination attempts. There's a lot that Americans are wanting to know. Here's what Elon Musk said Kash Patel will do.
Isn't it like mind-blowing that this has happened? I mean, it just... And what, by the way, why do we still know nothing about that guy in Butler? What's going on? Kash is going to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, there you go.
By the way, yeah.
So getting to the bottom of that, Griff, is important. We know Carly Shimkus reminded me yesterday that initially Chris Wray had come out and said, oh, maybe it was shrapnel that hit Trump, and then clarified it was actually a bullet. There's been a lot of mistakes.
Well, and I think, look, we know Kash Patel said some things that have upset some people, particularly with J6, when he wasn't employed in government, when he was doing podcasts and things. But the bigger point is that when he comes in and he finds out what really happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, why that happened, a lot of people will see that as a very positive development as one of his first acts. So I think Elon Musk is right. On the wider scope, he is, and Nicole greatly points out his background, but he's only the 9th director of the FBI in history, and they're appointed for 10 years. And when Kash in the hearings kept talking about, look, what I want to do is bring transparency, accountability, and a commitment to law enforcement to restore the trust, which I've got to believe has got to be at the lowest point it's been in modern days. If he can do that over the course of time, that may even exceed the term of President Donald Trump, well, that would be a much needed thing because the FBI is the top law enforcement agency in the country, and it has fallen from grace, and few people disagree with that. And to come in, and obviously he's going to clean house, he's going to do a lot of other things, and Doge will be a part of it as well. But getting to the bottom of what happened in Butler, getting the FBI cops that are good cops back on the street, out of Washington, out of politics, in the field, and protecting people, that's his task.
You might be in his mind, Griff Jenkins, because he spoke to Fox News Digital and he laid out pretty much exactly what you said as his top priorities. This was exclusively to Fox Digital. He said he wanted to rebuild the American people's trust in the FBI and then laid out priorities pretty much in sync with what Griff just said.
And I have no doubt that Kash Patel has what it takes to do exactly that. However, I do worry that when he starts digging and when he starts cleaning house at the FBI, he's going to run into many of the same problems that we're seeing across other federal agencies right now, which is this quiet subterfuge. I think of how just this week, several of our national parks have come out and said that they're no longer able to function properly because of so-called Trump Doge cuts, and about how California's Yosemite National Park in particular is no longer longer able to rescue visitors from the restrooms because they fired the one locksmith who had the one set of keys to those restrooms. And apparently that's Trump's fault, as if it's not an issue that the national park only had one set of keys to the restroom and one employee who knew where those keys were. There's a word for this, and it's called malicious compliance. And it reminds me of when I was back in high school, so I'm telling on myself a little bit here, but when Obama shut down a lot of the parks, and he even tried to go to Mount Vernon and put a chain up on the gate during the government shutdown. And the entire point was to make this as visibly painful as possible to drum up public opposition to it. That is exactly what the federal bureaucracy is starting to do with Trump's reforms, and Kash Patel is going to have to deal with that in the FBI.
Emily.
Yes, 100%. I think, for example, the Secret Service has some holdovers. I think that's what we're sort of, it dovetails in with what we were talking about earlier. That what the first step is identification, and the second step is then rooting out. And the tendrils of those malignant tumors run deep. So I think simply removing a lot of those DEI hires and those toxic oppositionists to the will of the American people, that's step one. But there's a lot of people that were put in place by those for the primary individuals first that still remain. We see that in the Public Affairs Office at Secret Service, for example, protecting the bureaucracy instead of protecting or serving the American people. Unrelated, I had the honor of interviewing Secretary Doug Collins of the VA yesterday, who talked to me about what he's facing there at the VA. And obviously, we were excited about his agenda coming forward that centers veterans. And he said that the greatest challenge that he's facing and will face is the culture, is dismantling the culture that didn't center veterans and that didn't prioritize their benefits and their care first and foremost. And he said, moving forward, the message that you can send is that there's new leadership in town. So that everything that you bring to the table, this is how it's always been done. We only have one locksmith, et cetera. Not anymore. There is a new leader in town. There's a new sheriff in town. There's a new everything in town, and it's backed by the American people.